most of the big name, coveted, difference-making free agents have been signed. So now we understand what the needs are for all 32 NFL teams. So without further ado, it's a post-free agency frenzy mock draft on the Bottom Line View. If that sounds good, Gronk, spike the like button, and don't forget to show your love. Don't be a jabroni, and subscribe for more analysis on all 32 NFL teams, including free agency news and the NFL draft. This is a full first-round mock draft with my prediction for every pick. We're not quite at the stage of the draft season where I'm giving you my opinion on who they should pick. This is a prediction based on the news and the needs of all 32 NFL teams. Let's kick it off with the first pick in the 2025 NFL Draft. I believe the Tennessee Titans will select Cam Ward, quarterback out of Miami. Now, I didn't always hold this belief, but now that Tennessee has gone through free agency without a veteran quarterback option that I like, namely Sam Darnold, Aaron Rodgers is not on their landscape or their radar. Kirk Cousins doesn't appear to be an option. Russell Wilson doesn't appear to be an option. There's nobody really going there outside of potentially a Jameis Winston type that I would actually respect as a starting option. Will Levis is not going to be the starting option past maybe a couple of weeks this season. Like, can they really roll into the season with Will Levis the way that he performed last year? The roller coaster? I do not believe so. And I think the more that the combine, these pro days, this process has taken over, people are starting to realize what I've believed from day one, which is that Cam Ward is far and away the best quarterback in this class. And when that's the case, this number one pick, when you're picking number one, you probably need a quarterback. Tennessee needs a quarterback. And we've seen that they didn't go out and address it with money in free agency. So it appears that they're all in on Cam Ward. I think all 32 teams just about believe that he's the best quarterback in this draft because he has the confidence, the charisma. I believe he has the pocket presence, the timing, the composure in the pocket against pressure, the playmaking capabilities, all that you're looking for in a franchise quarterback. And many are actually comparing him to none other than Steve McNair. Air McNair, who of course was a Tennessee legend. So that only helps his odds of being selected first overall. And I wouldn't blame them whatsoever for making this move. Cam Ward can be special, so I think it should be the pick by the Tennessee Titans. With the second overall pick, I struggled quite a bit with my decision here. Myles Garrett provided a little clarity into the point where I believe that the Cleveland Browns will be between the two guys from Colorado. I don't think that Abdul Carter will be the selection because they chose to put $40 million into Myles Garrett. And when you put that much money into your defensive line and your defensive end position, are you going to spend a second overall pick on the same position? It does feel a little redundant, right? So I'm not going with Abdul Carter here. Some may still go in that direction. I am going to go bold. And it's because of something that Myles Garrett said. I'm going with Shedeur Sanders out of Colorado, the quarterback, otherwise known as Deion Sanders' son. And I do not really believe that Shedeur Sanders should be second overall. I'm not so sure he's a first-round pick, to be honest with you. But when you need a quarterback, you have Deshaun Watson, who's injured and taking up a ton of cap space, limiting your options at quarterback. You kind of need to take swings. Because the weird thing about having Deshaun Watson is, you know he's not the answer, but he's being paid like he's more than the answer. That he is basically the franchise. So you need to find a way to capitalize on this draft position. And I think, based on what Myles Garrett said, he seemed to smirk and smile about the possibility of a quarterback coming to town in Cleveland. Shedeur has also been laying a lot of Easter eggs about maybe potentially playing for the Browns, like the fact that he said that the Browns were his favorite team to play with in Madden. I don't think that's nothing. He also had a Cleveland Browns hat on his backpack. Just throwing that out there. I do think that it's fairly likely that these things are not a coincidence, especially because Myles Garrett would not know if Aaron Rodgers was going to come, if Russell Wilson was going to come. Like, how would he know that at the time that he signed his contract? He would not know that, right? So it would more so be based on the fact that he would know that they're picking a quarterback, right? So I'm just trying to piece these things together. This is totally a prediction. This is not what I would do, okay? Travis Hunter would probably be my pick if I were Cleveland. But Sanders makes a lot of sense. And it can be talked into if you believe that Sanders, from the perspective of he's tough as nails, he's confident, nothing is going to break down his inner workings in terms of the young man that he is. Like, a place like Cleveland can be a little harsh. We've seen many quarterbacks fail in that environment. But this guy, I think his biggest strength is his personality. I think his biggest strength is his ability to lead, even as a younger man. And he does have enough traits as a quarterback, like accuracy, like his ability to read the field and touch football and all that sort of stuff. And then I believe, like, he can make some big throws. He doesn't have the greatest arm in the world. He's not the most mobile guy in the world. You kind of struggle with the overtop impressive traits. But I think his most impressive trait comes in his mind. So I do believe that Sanders could be selected here because he could be seen as a good fit for Stefanski. He could be seen for a good fit for the franchise, especially where they're currently at with the fact that they need a cheap option at this position. I know they traded for Kenny Pickett, but I don't think that's enough. I honestly think that's just a smokescreen. So at number 2, I'm going with Shedeur Sanders to the Browns. At number 3, that leaves Travis Hunter for the New York Giants. Now, some people may say, what about Abdul Carter? He's seen as the number 1 player in this draft. Well, to me, it wouldn't make sense for the Giants to select Abdul Carter. I am not the biggest Kayvon Thibodeau guy. I don't think he's really proven to be a great player in the NFL yet. He's okay. He's good. They could pick Carter, and all of a sudden they have a really awesome edge depth chart, and their pass rush is explosive and dangerous. But it's already pretty good. I mean, you have Dexter Lawrence. You did sign Golston from Dallas, which only kind of amplifies the fact that you don't need another edge rusher. You have Kayvon Thibodeau. You have Roy Robertson-Harris, who you brought in. So I feel like their defensive line is already pretty well constructed. An area of their team that they could improve is definitely corner. So if you want Travis Hunter to play corner, he could complement Paulson Adebo pretty well. If you want him to play receiver, there's always more room for more playmakers, and he could be the number 2 opposite Malik Neighbors. So I'm really looking at a great ideal situation for Hunter. A superstar talent deserves to play in a superstar market. He would be beloved in New York, and he's a physical player. I don't think he gets enough credibility or like respect for his engine, his motor, his relentlessness on the field, regardless of position or where he's playing. He's very talented. I think he'll be great in the NFL no matter the position, but he provides a pretty interesting coaching staff with that versatility that I think they'll covet, and they kind of need another superstar to spark this franchise. So I feel like Travis Hunter would be that name. A pass rusher might not quite give that same attraction to the fan base. So Travis Hunter would be the sexy pick, and I think the right selection for the New York Giants. At number 4, that leaves Abdul Carter for the Patriots. And I think some Pats fans might be a little bit disgruntled by this selection because they would prefer a receiver or an offensive lineman. And that's fair. I'm obviously speaking from a Patriots fan perspective. I think if Hunter or Carter are there, you got to pick the one that's there. Like, I think it's as simple as that. And you can never have enough amazing pass rushers. And really, when you look at it, it's not like the Patriots have a cornerstone pass rusher. They have a great interior player in Milton Williams now. They have potentially a second in Christian Barmore. They've got some nice edge rushers like Keon White and Harold Landry, but they don't have a potential Micah Parsons, TJ Watt, Myles Garrett level athlete and prospect on their D-line. They don't have that. And being as how Mike Vrabel was a linebacker and an edge rusher himself, and they've put and spent all this money into the defense, imagine if you could add this versatile athlete that could destroy games and plays, like Abdul Carter as your centerpiece, along with Christian Gonzalez on the back end for years to come. All of a sudden, your defense might be the best in the league, or it's in the conversation. If you look at their depth chart right now, they're certainly up there. And I feel like you could just settle that side of the ball with this pick. Like, honestly, there would be nothing else really to add. So I know that they need receiver, and I know that they need tackle, but when you can get this level of player with this level of potential, I think you have to make the selection. So that's why I'm going with Abdul Carter to the Patriots if this is the outcome of the first three selections. At number 5, I'm sticking with Mason Graham to the Jacksonville Jags. Reason for this is their new general manager comes from Los Angeles. He covets the defensive line. He's already spoke about the fact that he wants defensive linemen. They're going to spend many draft picks on defensive linemen. If you look at where they've addressed their needs, they've mostly kind of ignored the defensive tackle position, and maybe Eric Armstead takes a step up in that position for next season, but it would make the most sense for Mason Graham. He's largely been seen as a top 5 to top 7 prospect, and although his measurables aren't that impressive, his game tape shows a very Fisk-like defensive tackle from the Rams, where he's very twitchy, very quick, very disruptive. That's the type of player that I feel like would fit their defense well and complement what they already have on the defensive line with Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker. And that would really make kind of an area where it's a little bit, it's close to being a really good strength for your team. But if you could add another top 5 pick to this area of your team, you could potentially establish a strength in your defensive front for years to come with 3 pretty young players, like all of them rather being in their prime or just beginning. So I think Mason Graham would make Jacksonville's defensive front something to mess with, and that's why I'm going with that selection at defensive tackle. I think that's probably their biggest need right now. At number 6, the Las Vegas Raiders will pick Tet McMillan T-Mac out of Arizona. In my opinion, the best pure receiver in the draft. I think that his 40 solidifies him as a top 10 selection. He's just too gifted. His ball skills are too wicked. His size, his speed combination, along with the smooth hands, the jump ball skills. He's just a pure X receiver in a prototype mold that's hard to find. And whether you think he's the next Drake London or whoever you comp him to, I think that's very fair to pick him this high in the draft, especially in considering a weaker draft class, especially at wide receiver. I mean, I feel like this wide receiver class might have some depth to it, but it doesn't have a lot of these type of guys where they could, from day one, be a difference-making perimeter player. And the Raiders definitely need an X receiver. Just imagine for years to come, Brock Bowers and T-Mac together, complementing each other in a perfect manner, right? One can stretch the field, one can work the underneath. That's perfect. That's what you want in an offense, right? That's what you want from your 1 and your 2. And then you still have Jacoby Myers for now to operate as that secondary option. So now you're really giving Geno and your future quarterback a lot of assets to work with. And all of a sudden, the Raiders, even post Geno, become a very desirable location because they have 2 awesome weapons. Plus, you're talking about Tom Brady being a quarterback, a guy that's going to have heavy draft influence, a guy that loved to throw for the, to the likes of Mike Evans, a similarly sized type of player, a Randy Moss, right? He understands how those players changed and shift the perspective of the defense. And then you're talking about Spy Tech, who has the funniest name in the league, coming from Tampa Bay, being a guy that obviously was there for Mike Evans as well. So I feel like T-Mac makes a lot of sense to the Raiders for sure. I think wide receiver is a huge need for them. At number 7, I got Membu to the New York Jets, the tackle out of Missouri. I just feel like the Jets are going to address the offensive front and the offensive line, and now they'll have 2 cornerstones at left and right tackle, which, if you think about it, their offensive linemen, if they actually bring in a Membu, like their offensive line, pretty good. Like, their interior improved a lot last year. They made some key signings last season. All of a sudden, you've got offensive coordinator from Detroit who's going to want to run a Ben Johnson-like system, going to want to establish a little bit of grit and toughness at the line of scrimmage and run the football. You've got Aaron Glenn from the Detroit Lions, understanding the impact of their offensive line and how it allows them to dictate games and win the line of scrimmage. And I feel like that's going to be a point of emphasis. So Membu being the fact that he's probably the most high upside tackle in the draft. He's the more natural right tackle out of him and Will Campbell. And he perhaps has even better measurables. I feel like he's a potential monster to add to the Jets offense and potentially secure a long-term future at offensive line for whoever their next quarterback is. But especially for now, he opens up their run game for Justin Fields. At number 8, Jalen Walker to the Carolina Panthers. These are 4 consecutive picks that I have not changed. The next pick, we're going to change some things up. But these 4 picks, I feel good about the need still. I feel good about the player fit. And when you look at Jalen Walker, he's a guy that I don't think the Panthers necessarily have. He's a hybrid off-ball linebacker that can contribute as a pass rusher, aka a Frankie Louvu type. You think about Dan Morgan being the general manager of Carolina, a guy that was a former linebacker. So I think he's going to look at this position and see it as a big need in the defense. I think you look at Evero's system, having different toys to play with in terms of Jalen Walker's athleticism. I think that will be coveted as well. So there could be players like more pure, better edge rushers that they would covet, but I felt like they went after some defensive linemen. They went after some pass rushers. They definitely tried to secure their run defense up, but I feel like this is a piece that they can kind of put everywhere and fix multiple holes on a defense that was so bad that they kind of need to fix multiple holes. So I like the versatility of his game. I like the athlete. I like the player. So I'm going to put Jalen Walker at number 8. At number 9, this is a different opinion here, or a different perspective on the Saints' needs post-free agency. So they let go of Paulson Adebo. Currently, their cornerback depth chart is pretty thin, in my opinion. I'm not a huge fan of the players they have at those spots. Alontae Taylor, Kool-Aid. I don't love these guys. So for me, they secured Chase Young long-term, which speaks to maybe they don't want to address defensive end in the first round. They have Carl Granderson. They still have Cam Jordan for now. You know, they spent a first-round pick on Brian Brzee once upon a time. So I look at Will Johnson and I say, yeah, he's kind of struggling through the process in terms of injury and not testing and things like that. But a lot of scouts love him. And Brandon Staley is the Saints' new defensive coordinator. He has more of an emphasis than their previous regime even did in terms of like cornerback play, zone cornerback play, size and length, right? So I feel like Will Johnson fits the type of mold of what Brandon Staley would be looking for in a CB1, being that he has rare length and rare height. And if he does run well eventually, when he does, I feel like that will probably position him for a top 15 selection. And when you look at the Saints depth chart, like, could they go with a Campbell here or like an offensive lineman and secure the long-term future of their offensive line? Sure. I don't necessarily feel like a guard is worthy of this pick, though. I feel like unless they get a quarterback to slip here, they could go with a quarterback. I don't think they're going to go with a receiver. I don't think they'll go with the running back. Even if Kamara's getting older. So if I don't really feel like those positions are like the biggest areas of need, I kind of think corner is the biggest. And I feel like Johnson is the best fit for what Brandon Staley's looking for. And he is a rare prospect in terms of dimension. And he's also been looked at as a top 10 player in this draft for quite some time. So that's why I went with him at number 9. At number 10, this is where Ashton Jeanty comes off the board. Running back out of Boise State to the Chicago Bears. The Bears have now established that their offensive line is built, and I don't think they're going to go out of their way to select their 6th offensive lineman. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. Braxton Jones, I think, is a much better player than he's given credit for, as well as Darnell Wright, by the way. Both of these players were graded as top 30 tackles last season. I think their interior needed to be addressed, and now that they added Joe Thuney, Drew Dahlman, and Jonah Jackson, I don't think the offensive line will need any more capital this high in the draft. They have a tight end in Cole Kmet. I did consider Tyler Warren here. Wide receiver, I feel like they just spent a pick this high on Rome Odunze, so they're not going to do that again. And you look at the defense, and I feel like edge rusher is a possibility, but they spent money on a Denibo, right? And they've got Montez Sweat. They also added Grady Jarrett. So they're starting to take care of their needs in other places. They don't need linebackers. They don't really need corners, right? And a safety shouldn't really go this high. So I feel like Genty is maybe a little bit of a, not necessarily like the biggest positional value pick, but if you're talking about a Ben Johnson offense, do you really want DeAndre Swift to be the guy in your backfield? You have potentially a generational type of running back here with power, explosion, and a well-rounded blend of a game that can establish a ground and pound approach from the Chicago Bears that need to be able to run the ball in their city and their place of business. Like, I don't think they view DeAndre Swift as that type of player, especially because Detroit had him in their building with Ben Johnson. So I kind of think that they're going to bring in Ashton Genty as that cherry on top of this offense. And just imagine if Caleb ends up striking this season, you might have three fundamental long-term playmaking players in your offense, like Rome at receiver, Caleb at quarterback, and Genty at running back. That is potentially a triplet situation going on. So that's where I just think it's so attractive for them to go with this running back at number 10. At number 11, Mykel Williams out of Georgia. He's a little bit more raw than some of the edge prospects, not quite the production of some others, but I think he has rare skills in terms of explosiveness, his length, his size, his power. And when you're talking about the 49ers, I think by far their biggest weakness or their biggest need is defensive front and defensive line. And that's an area that they constantly covet this highly in the draft, right? You think about Solomon Thomas, you think about Nick Bosa, you think about Javon Kinlaw. They've constantly gone after, even before that, like Buckner, Armstead, and that was a different regime. But the Niners have constantly been known for picking defensive linemen this high. I don't think they're known for picking offensive linemen this high, and I actually feel like they feel fairly comfortable with their offensive line. Maybe they'll spend a pick in the second or the third round on a tackle or a guard or a center, but I think defensive front needs to be addressed first, because right now the depth chart is thin, and in terms of real starting caliber players, it's really only Nick Bosa. So securing that long-term edge on the opposite side of Nick Bosa constantly makes this Robert Saleh defense much more attractive. Robert Saleh loves his edge rushers, including picking a guy like Will McDonald much higher than people thought he would go, although I loved Will McDonald myself. You know, they even picked Jermaine Johnson, you know, some others in that regime as well. So Mykel Williams makes sense because they have one of the best defensive lineman coaches in football that can get the most out of these type of talents and mold this player into being an absolute animal. He's already going to be very good against the run early in his career, which is kind of a point of emphasis right now for the 49ers. They let go of players because they were not good against the run. So he can provide a nice edge setting presence. Their coaching can uplift him into a really good pass rusher, and all of a sudden you've got two cornerstone players on your defensive front. So I like this pick right here at number 11. At number 12, I'm going a little bit crazy here. I've seen this one or two times. Matthew Golden to the Dallas Cowboys. I think the Cowboys are one of those teams that they often kind of foreshadow who they're going to pick in the draft. And they do that by addressing needs in free agency that they don't pick early in the draft. So what have they addressed in free agency? Running back, Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders. Despite neither really being an RB1, they have addressed that, okay? Offensive line, they brought in Robert Jones to just compete with the other guys like Hoffman on the offensive line. Defensive front, while you may say they got rid of a couple of good players like Fowler, he comes in for DeMarcus Lawrence, right? Golston's gone. Like, they tried to address it with players like Peyton Turner, right? Solomon Thomas, right? So defensive line, I don't think is going to be the first round pick, defensive tackle specifically. Linebacker, they added multiple pieces, including trading for Kenneth Murray, who was a starting linebacker in the NFL last year. Don't see that as a huge first round need for them. Safety's already addressed, and corner, they've got their top 2 corners, so I don't think they'd be adding a nickel corner this high. So I look at it as they haven't addressed wide receiver. Brandon Cooks is a free agent. Yeah, they brought back Turpin, but they don't have a number 2 option. And Matthew Golden could provide rare speed that I'm sure Jerry Jones would be very much attracted to in his offense. So I think they need a guy that can stretch defenses out. I think they need a guy that Dak Prescott can go down the field to. I think they need another receiver that can separate and win with route running, and that's Matthew Golden. So I think that's going to be the pick for the Cowboys because they often give away their pick. And I think that wide receiver is the place that they have not kind of addressed yet. At number 13, that leaves Will Campbell out of LSU, the tackle guard to the Miami Dolphins. And this would solve multiple needs. This could solve a long-term left tackle need with Teron Armstead. This could also solve the immediate need at guard. So this is obvious. He's probably not going to go this low. He might not drop this low. He could go as high as number 4 to the Patriots. So he'll go inside the top 15 without a shadow of a doubt. But just the way that the board fell and the needs fell for every team, Will Campbell feels like at number 13, he's not going to last any further. I considered him for the 49ers, but like I said, I feel like the Niners' bigger need is on the defensive line, while Miami, their biggest need by far is on the offensive line. Maybe the interior defensive line, but they've never really addressed that in a major way under Mike McDaniel. This is an offensive coach. He's going to want to protect his often injury-riddled quarterback, and Will Campbell might drop just a little in the draft due to the short arms. Maybe just a little. So Campbell is going to maybe cause a little hesitancy for that, and that's why I have him at 13. At number 14, I still have Tyler Warren to the Indianapolis Colts. I dove through the depth chart and I really thought about it, but at the end of the day, I feel like tight end is by far their biggest need. They addressed corner, and I often kind of look at people giving them another corner early in the draft, and that's just never how they've operated, in this regime. They never covet those players this highly. Secondly, I feel like the players that they have right now are kind of underrated at the alternative spots outside of Charvarius Ward, who's the well-known player. They address safety, so I don't think they're necessarily going to go there because they gave Bynum a big contract, and Nick Cross is kind of underrated. Defensive line already has a lot of depth, and despite a lot of them being older, I don't see that as an immediate need, maybe more of a developmental need. Wide receiver does not need to be addressed at all. Running back does not need to be addressed at all. Maybe offensive line, that's possible, right? Like a guard or a center, but are they going to pick one this high? I'm not so sure, and it feels like they're already pretty comfortable with who they have replacing Ryan Kelly. It's more so about who's replacing Will Fries. And then linebacker is potentially where, maybe Jahad Campbell could go here. That's possible, but I think Warren is more attractive. I think he's seen as the better prospect. He gives them just a unique player within their offense that I feel like, as good as some of their players are, they don't really have a player like this where he's kind of unique. He's very gifted. And you think about Dallas Goedert in Philadelphia, the presence under Shane Steichen. I think that he could use Warren in some similar ways with his well-rounded, versatile game, his yak ability, his toughness. He fits what the Colts want to be on offense. And he gives Anthony Richardson another weapon to help prop him up to be the guy if that's what they're looking for, which he probably isn't. But it gives whoever the next quarterback is another option in the passing game. So I feel like Warren is just too good of a player. And honestly, in this type of draft, he's probably not going to last much longer than this. At number 15, Shamar Stewart to the Atlanta Falcons out of Texas A&M. Now, he doesn't have a lot of production in his college career, but very, very toolsy, very raw. And if you're the Atlanta front office and you're Raheem Morris, you should be counting on your former linebacker coach, your former defensive coordinator, your former genius, apparently, of defense to be able to coach up a player with this many tools and this many raw skills and make him a dog on the edge, because that's exactly what the Falcons need. I don't think they can really go in any other direction but edge here. I know they brought in Leonard Floyd, but I don't think that's good enough, right? They've been bringing in former Ram after former Ram. Morgan Fox, they just signed Jordan Fuller for the secondary. So that kind of takes care of business for a starting safety. To replace Justin Simmons. So safety shouldn't really be a huge need. Corner is not really the position that I feel like Raheem Morris is looking for. I think that defensive front is always going to be where he is looking to add to his defense more so than the secondary. And they do have a number one corner already in A.J. Terrell. So they don't really need another corner this high in the draft. So it's all about their pass rush. It's about solving that. So one of the pass rushers will go to the Falcons. It's a matter of who. And Stewart is most often seen as the highest drafted because he is the most freaky of the fits for the Falcons. So I have him at 15. At number 16, I have Derek Harmon. Maybe a little bit more surprising to the Arizona Cardinals. They did make a move with Dalvin Tomlinson to their interior defensive line, but I still feel like interior defensive line is a main need for them, because if you look at how their defensive front is constructed right now, I kind of feel like they've got the one big defensive lineman in Tomlinson. Darius Robinson, who they picked late in the first round, I believe last year, is more of a strong side end, right? So he's rather a 5 tech and a 3-4, or he's like the strong side end in a 4-3 front. And then you've also got Josh Sweat, who will play on every snap as an outside linebacker or as a defensive end. And then you've got Baron Browning, who's more of a rotation rusher, who kind of will replace Robinson as an edge player, and maybe you can move Robinson inside. So with that being said, if you add Derek Harmon, not only do you have a guy that I feel like could play in that 3-4, 4-3 versatile look, you could also have a guy that plays on every snap and could rotate with potentially Dalvin Tomlinson on the inside. So you've got now all of a sudden you add that 5-man rotation to your defensive line, where Jonathan Gannon, coming from Philadelphia, wanted that deep rotation, right? That's what Vic Fangio has in Philly. Gannon's a Vic Fangio guy, being that defensive line coach for Josh Sweat and for Fletcher Cox and Javon Hargrave and Hassan Reddick and all the guys that he had in Philadelphia. I feel like he understands how big it is to have a deep rotation. And now you could potentially have a guy like Harmon who can wreck the game, a similar kind of player to like a Javon Hargrave, where he's a very good, quick, savvy pass rusher. Maybe needs to be a little bit better against the run, but if you could maybe mold that a little bit and teach that a little bit, and you could add that to your rotation of Robinson, Sweat, Browning, and Tomlinson, all of a sudden you're cooking up a defensive front that is light years better than last year's. And then you could bring back maybe even Dennis Gardeck. So you've got a lot of potential there with that defensive line. Corner is often seen as a need for them, but I honestly think their corners are a little underrated. Safeties are already secure. Linebacker could be a spot, but I just don't think they usually spend in that area. They oftentimes look to bring in kind of more gems for that position. Offensive line is also an area that they could address as well, but it feels like they're fairly comfortable with the pieces they have. And wide receiver would just feel like not necessarily, it would be maybe a little bit of a reach, and it feels like they have McBride and Harrison, who are kind of already their 1 and their 2. So do they really need a third playmaker? I don't know. So yeah, maybe O-line, maybe corner, but I think D-line is still their biggest need, especially the interior, not the edge. Mike Green, we're going to talk about an edge right now for the Cincinnati Bengals. Very productive out of Marshall. Love his bend and his slipperiness on the edge. I think he's a good pass rusher. This is exactly the type of build of player that the Bengals would look for on the opposite side of Trey Hendrickson. He's got some Trey Hendrickson in terms of that feistiness and that bite in his game. And I feel like they need another guy that can just get after it on the edge. So it's pretty simple. It's pretty secure. Like, the Bengals need defense. There's not much else to say here. It's also a player that is not necessarily a projection. Because of his production, he's probably going to be seen by the Bengals as more of a secure selection. And honestly, defensively this year, they need to be looking for guys that they feel like can contribute right now, because they're not a team that's going to be sitting there developing these defensive players because they just signed T. Higgins. They're probably going to try to bring back Trey Hendrickson. Like, they're trying to win Super Bowls now. So bringing in draft picks that can really be productive right away is probably more ideal in my opinion. At number 18, Gray Zabel to the Seattle Seahawks. I've just read from guys like Daniel Jeremiah that they actually expect Gray Zabel to go pretty high. So like in the top 25, in the top 20 potentially, like in this range is what I've read. So with that being said, Seattle's biggest need by far is guard. Like their biggest need by far is interior offensive line. It's really not any other area. I did consider Barron. I did consider a corner for them because they could use one more corner. But every other position is well constructed. You know, linebackers maybe not perfect, but you have your number one linebacker in Ernest Jones. You've got pretty good safeties. Maybe you could use one more safety, right? But the edge rushers are there. The interior D-line is loaded. And the tackles are there. The receivers are there for now. The running back's there. The quarterback's there. So really, it's about protecting Sam Darnold. And if you watched and scouted Sam properly, you would kind of look and see that he's affected heavily by interior pressure. So I know that Seahawks fans or whatever may not want them to pick a guy this high, or maybe they're not used to picking guys this high at this position. But it's by far the area that you need to address the most because I don't care what Sam Darnold did last year. If you do not protect him, he's going to see ghosts and he's going to regress. So I like Gray Zabel here at number 18. I gave you the other guard out of Alabama, Tyler Booker, the last mock draft. So I'm going with the alternative here. At number 19, I'm sticking with Jahad Campbell to the Tampa Bay Bucks. I think if he slips this far, and I've already discussed him multiple times as possibilities to different teams. Like, I think he could land, you know, anywhere really from like number 9, maybe even number 8. Like Carolina could pick him. The Saints could pick him. The Niners could pick him. The Colts could pick him. There's a number of teams that could select Campbell, you know, well before this pick. So I feel like this would be kind of a steal. And the Bucs are kind of known for just picking that player that kind of falls to them oftentimes. And Jason Lights, I think, is going to look at this as the guy that could be the long-term replacement for Levante David. And in the meantime, he could be tutored by Levante David. He's not an immediate need because they did bring in Anthony Walker, but Campbell can also contribute in a variety of ways. He can be a linebacker. He can also rush a little bit and be a bit of a blitzer. So he's an ideal complement to the defense they already have. He's an ideal scheme fit for Todd Bowles, and he'll bring great coverage to the middle of the field of the Bucs, which is definitely what they needed last year. Their coverage in the middle of the field was contagiously awful. So I think Campbell is going to be the pick if he does get this far down the board. That being said, if he doesn't, I could see the Bucs pivoting to maybe O-line, like maybe guard, or maybe safety or corner, okay? But I would say that Campbell, if he's here, is the obvious pick for them because they need to be thinking about long-term post-Levante David, especially considering how important that player has been for their defense. At number 20, Amarian Hampton out of UNC, the running back to the Denver Broncos. The Broncos don't have a pure starting running back in this league. They've got a change of pace guy in the quick little man, McLaughlin. They have a big back that can play a power role in Audric Estime. They let go of Javonte Williams. Hampton is a well-rounded back that can be explosive, a good pass catcher, and make you miss. And a player that I think Sean Payton would love to have. A 3-down running back, a guy that can catch passes, and a guy that can be a difference maker for their screen-led offense, right? A lot of RPOs, a lot of quick passes, yak. That's the type of player that would fit really well for Sean Payton. So I know it's a running back in the first round, but I think that 2 of them will probably go in the first round. At number 21, this is a bold pick. This is more of a prediction. I would not pick Jackson Dart this high, but I'm going to go Jackson Dart out of Mississippi to the Pittsburgh Steelers. At this point, maybe Aaron Rodgers does sign with the Steelers, okay? But if he does or he doesn't, they still need a long-term quarterback. And they honestly don't have a lot of needs. Defensive line was the one area I thought maybe they could go after because Cam Hayward is older than dirt. So a long-term defensive tackle to be able to groom under Cam Hayward would make a lot of sense, okay? But it's not an immediate need, right? They don't really have an immediate need anywhere on their defense, okay? Because they took care of business with Darius Slay. They brought in a nickel corner, maybe if it's not the best nickel corner, but they brought him in. Juan Thornhill addresses safety, with more depth there. And they brought in a wide receiver, DK Metcalf. I don't think they would draft a third. Running back, they have Jalen Warren, maybe running back, I guess, but I don't think that that's the area they're going to go. So honestly, a young quarterback that they could have sit for a year and let him grow and learn from an Aaron Rodgers or a Russell Wilson, that would make a lot of sense. And Jackson Dart is very young. I think he's 21. Some people really like him, feel like he has the skill set. So being that the Steelers are never going to be a team that it feels like picks inside the top 5 or the top 10, they need to keep taking swings on these Kenny Pickett area type of quarterbacks. I'm sorry, but they kind of need to, right? So maybe they would decide to wait till the second round, but I'm just saying this is more possible than Steeler fans think, because if you really look at your team, where are you going to draft other than maybe defensive line or interior offensive line? I don't really see a lot of areas. At number 22, Colston Loveland out of Michigan to Jim Harbaugh. He returns to Harbaugh, and the Chargers clearly need a tight end. I think that this is more of a position that makes sense for Greg Roman and Harbaugh than a receiver, just because Roman was known for using multiple tight ends in Baltimore, even to the point where they picked, I believe, Hayden Hurst and Mark Andrews in the same draft. And then they would also use Patrick Ricard as a tight end. They would often have 2-3 tight end sets in Baltimore, right? In San Francisco, they had Vernon Davis and they had Delaney Walker, right? I believe so. So they often like those multiple tight end sets. So even with whoever they have right now, Will Dissly, you can add a younger tight end with more physical upside, more playmaking ability, and he doesn't have to play all the time, but you can definitely add some intriguing upside alongside Justin Herbert and Ladd McConkey, and you could have another piece for this playmaking skill set and this multiple dimensional multi-tight end led offense. So it makes a lot of sense for the Chargers to go with a tight end here, especially after signing Mekhi Becton, Andre James on the offensive line. Feels like offensive line is less of a priority early in the draft now. Maybe they could go with a defensive lineman or a corner, but I think that tight end makes more sense here for them. They need a weapon, but I feel like tight end is more so making sense for Harbaugh than a receiver. At number 23, I go with J.D. Barron out of Texas for the Green Bay Packers. It does appear that at some point Jair could be moved, even on draft day potentially, to a cornerback needy team. So I think that the corner position, even if they keep Alexander, makes a lot of sense. This was one of the worst teams in terms of success rate allowed through the air last year. Their pass rush wasn't great, and their secondary was arguably even worse. So I think Barron can play inside or out. He brings a lot of versatility, and a lot of people just like his feistiness and his ability to be a football player. He's a good tackler. Everything about his game seems to just be able to switch gears to the NFL level. He's just a dog out there, and the Packers defense needs a hint of energy. So I'm going to go with Barron to the Packers. At number 24, Malachi Starks out of Georgia. This makes a lot of sense to go secondary for the Vikings. Every area of need has been addressed. Interior offensive line, they already have good tackles. Wide receiver is great. They are going with JJ at quarterback. Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason at running back. No need there. Defensive line, Hargrave and Allen with Phillips, right? They've got good linebackers. They've got good edge players 3 deep. It's really corner or safety. And I think the top prospect and even the safest prospect on the board here is Starks. He's got great intelligence, great ball skills and understanding of awareness and spacing. And I feel like he could be one of those Harrison Smith replacement type of players where he could learn under Harrison Smith a little bit and really take his game to the next level. But that's the type of savvy player in coverage that you want to replace a Harrison Smith. So this is a long-term move. Also, you got to think about their free safety left in Bynum. So he's an immediate replacement for his skill set as well. So Starks at number 24. At number 25, Josh Simmons. I know that they just signed Cam Robinson, and ultimately, not to lie to you guys, I did decide on Simmons before I heard about Cam Robinson, but I'm not really going to change the conversation when it comes to this pick because Cam Robinson's only signed to a 1-year contract. Cam Robinson, in my opinion, is not that good of a player anyways, so I don't necessarily see him getting a long-term contract with the Houston Texans. So I view Josh Simmons as a high-end potential tackle that, yes, has some injury potentially issues there, but CJ Stroud has often been very involved in who he wants on his team. If you guys have noticed, like Stroud's actually been involved in like draft analysis on Bleacher Report. Shout out to Bleacher Report. And you can often see that CJ is in contact with Nick Caserio and they like are kind of working together. So being that Stroud played with Simmons, he knows him at a personal level, he probably would feel very comfortable with this pick as opposed to maybe another available tackle like Kelvin Banks. And Simmons has the most upside out of any of the tackles that remain on the board. So I think Simmons makes the most sense here for multiple reasons. At number 26, we've got Azarieh. That's how you pronounce it. Azarieh Thomas out of FSU. Okay, this is a long cornerback. Better in, I would say he's good at press, better in zone, arguably than man. Not the fastest, but not the slowest. And when you look at the biggest needs on the Rams, they need a corner. I know that they just re-signed Witherspoon, but they need another corner. Okay? So I think they love FSU prospects. That's another connection. I've seen multiple people mock this player to them, and I think that's not out of coincidence. And being that they have that connection to the school based on what they did in last year's draft, the type of player that he is with the length similar to a Witherspoon in their defense, they like this type of mold of corner, right? Jalen Ramsey, also weirdly enough, was FSU, right? So I think Thomas does make a lot of sense. Fits a need, fits a prototype, fits a school of preference for the Rams. At number 27, James Pierce Jr. out of Tennessee to the Baltimore Ravens. I personally really like James Pierce because he is one of those type of finesse, bendy pass rushers that I always love. This is my preference for an edge player if I were to be picking and being a general manager. And I don't know if Baltimore, that's their personal preference. Typically in their regime, they do like the stiffer athlete types. I feel like if Stewart were to fall this far to them, I feel like that would maybe be their choice, or a Michael Williams type. But I think they need to spark their pass rush. Like, I don't necessarily think they need a guy that can play on the edge and set the edge. Like, they've still got Oweh and they've got Kyle Van Noy. But Kyle Van Noy is not going to last forever. And they do need a guy that can come in on third down right now and just be a specialist to get to the quarterback. And to me, Pierce can add a lot of flair and flexibility and depth to that position. And really, when you look at Baltimore's roster, they don't need a lot. Maybe they could draft a guard at this spot. That's possible after losing Makari. It's not going to be a receiver. They signed DeAndre Hopkins. It's not going to be a running back, right? It's not a tight end. They've got two of those. Like, really, it's guard or pass rush or corner. And honestly, they just spent a first-round corner last year on a player that's really, really good. So I don't think that they need those areas. I think that the long-lasting need for them over the last couple of years that has lacked that area where they could really like boost themselves in the playoffs is a finisher, a pass rusher, a guy that can make a difference getting to the quarterback. And I think that's James Pierce. So that's why I went with an edge player at 27. At number 28, Tyler Booker to the Detroit Lions. Now, I considered an edge player here, but I didn't really love the fits for any of the remaining prospects for the Detroit Lions. But I do think the ideal pick for Detroit would be a pass rusher in this spot. That's just my opinion. Marcus Davenport, to me, is not reliable. So I feel like him as the third or fourth rusher would be much better than the second, right? So finding a long-term solution beside or on the opposite side of Aiden Hutchinson would be ideal. But they also have a big need at right guard because Kevin Zeitler is gone. And Tyler Booker fits the type of player that the Lions like. He's physical, he's feisty, he's aggressive, and he's a really good run blocker, and he's massive. So he's a mauler. That's the bite your kneecap attitude, and the Lions want to continue to establish themselves as a dominant front on the offensive line. That's the area they need to maintain that strength. That is the identity of their team, and Glasgow and Ragnow are not getting any younger. So I feel like Tyler Booker is definitely a nice pick here for sure. At number 29, we've got Donovan Ezeraku. I think I got that right. Out of Boston College, the pass rusher to the Commanders. Now, I like this fit a lot. Now, this is a player I considered to the Lions, but I think based on the prototype of edge rusher that the Lions like, he's a little bit too small for the Lions. But I think that he is a Dante Fowler replacement for the Commanders. The one place that they've gotten weaker, in my opinion, the Commanders, is that pure pass rushing edge, the finesse speed rusher. And I think Ezeraku fits very well in that spot, filling in for Fowler, right? He's had a lot of production at Boston College. He can get around the corner and get to the quarterback. So in a rotation where they've addressed depth and they've addressed volume, they need some upside. They need some long-term security and future. And he can rotate in with all the other guys that they've brought in. So I feel like this would be a perfect fit for the style of team that the Commanders are going to be, which is we're going to score a lot of points. Our offense is going to put pressure on you, and we need to finish with our pass rush. So that makes a lot of sense, in my opinion, at 29. At 30, Maxwell Hairston to the Buffalo Bills. This, in my opinion, is unlikely just because, and even though this is my prediction, it's unlikely in terms of the style of player, the prototype, because Hairston ran a 4.28. And no offense to the Bills, but they don't like fast players on their defense. They oftentimes like size in their secondary. And I do think if the Bills are smart, they would look at who their competition is. They would look at Zay Flowers. They would look at Xavier Worthy, right? And they would say, we need a corner that can run. We need a corner that can cover. And Benford, for as good as he is, he's not fast, right? So they need a complement to Benford. A guy that can run and play man coverage or even zone coverage, react to the football. He's got great ball skills. I think he had 6 picks last year, Hairston. He can break on the football, right? But he's got the speed to run with a Worthy. You're going to have to deal with him for a long time. He's got the speed to run with Flowers, the quickness to run with Flowers, right? So those are your main opponents. That's what you should be addressing. And corner is their biggest need on their roster. You could say it's safety, but they brought back Hamlin and they signed Forrest. So I say immediate need is to upgrade Dayton Jackson, right? They got rid of Kyer Elam, Rasul Douglas, a free agent. Upgrade that CB2 spot with Hairston, a quick, twitchy, fast corner that is seen to be going in this range of the draft. And I think Buffalo could use a player like that to make them much faster on the back end. At number 31, Kelvin Banks Jr. to the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, it's probably unlikely he lasts this long, but in my mock draft, that's the way it went. And Kelvin Banks is seen as a left tackle, but he could play guard. And so I look at it as Jalen Moore is probably going to start at left tackle, but he's not like secure at left tackle because he's barely played for the 49ers. He doesn't have a lot of tape. So yeah, the Chiefs are counting on Moore to be their long-term solution there, but he's not even on a long-term contract. I think it's only 2 years. So really, I see it as they could address 2 positions with 1 pick, where Banks, if Moore does not work out, could be the left tackle. And at the same time, if Moore does work out, he could be a left guard. He's athletic enough to move, and be kind of a Joe Tooney replacement where he'll be a better pass blocker than a run blocker potentially. Athletic in space, all that sort of stuff. Not overwhelmingly big, but more, got the feet to move and stuff like that. So I feel like Banks would be perfect for what the Chiefs are trying to walk that line of like, okay, we need a left tackle kinda, but we kinda already addressed that. But at the same time, our bigger need is left guard. But it would be ideal if we had a player that had versatility. So I feel like Banks is an ideal pick at 31. And then at number 32, our final pick in this mock draft. And guys, if you've enjoyed the mock draft, Gronk spiked the like button. Let me know if you'd like to see more mock drafts. I know I never usually do a lot of mock drafts, but if you guys are enjoying them, and if we get 100 likes on this video, I'll make another one shortly. So let me know. At number 32, Nick Iman Worry. Okay? This one's tough, man. Now, I actually had him going fairly high in my first mock draft. I don't know if he's going to go that high in the real draft. I could see him maybe slipping to the end of the first round. I think there are some concerns about his overall rawness. Like, he has a lot of physical ability, like one of the freakiest players in the draft. That's exactly what you want to bring to Vic Fangio. A physical freak, tall, long, fast, all that sort of stuff. And their biggest need on their team, arguably right now, is safety. They let go of CJ Gardner-Johnson, and they only really have one starting safety, and that's Reed Blankenship. Their other is Sidney Brown, who I liked coming out of the draft, and maybe they like him more than we think. But I don't know, because he hasn't really started that much for the Eagles the last couple of years. So for me, I think that's their biggest need, because Darius Slay was replaced by Adoree Jackson, and I don't know what Ringo's going to do, but they've got him too. And then you look at, defensive line, like, they've kind of addressed a lot of the areas where, like, Ojulari and Uche have been brought in to hopefully replace Sweat. And then you've got the interior where, yeah, Milton Williams left, but you still have Jordan Davis. You've got the other kid, the rookie from last year. And you've got Hunt at edge too to play with Nolan Smith. So, like, is defensive line an immediate need? You've got a lot of young and upside options there. So I don't necessarily think so. Like, offensive line, guard Steen is a fine replacement for Becton. So I don't see that as an immediate need either. And they also traded for Kenyon Green too. Wide receiver would just be redundant in my opinion. Like, I don't really see an area other than safety and maybe like defensive line, just because that's what the Eagles do. Like, maybe corner, I guess. But this is the best prospect on the board. He's got a ton of range, a ton of speed. He's a great athlete. And this is the type of player that could easily convert from being a guy that plays in the box to being a guy that can play with range and speed and cover. Like, that's the type of guy that Fangio needs. His safeties are important for their ability to play, too high, but then also to make an impact tackling and come downhill, because they're often in too high structures. So that read and react and speed is pretty important also to be able to match and cover down the field. So I think that this would be the ideal pick for Philadelphia to secure their biggest need on their roster right now. That is your updated post-free agency NFL mock draft. Let me know what you thought of my predictions. Spike the like button and subscribe. It's Mitch. Peace.